She won't remember the compliments, not the ones you rehearsed, not the ones you posted, not even the ones that made her smile, because the words that leave no echo are the ones spoken from a place of performance, not presence. Most men speak to be heard, to be acknowledged, to be liked, but there's a kind of speech that doesn't aim to impress. It penetrates. It doesn't linger because it was loud. It lingers because it was real. And when it's real, it stays. Zeno didn't build stoicism by shouting. He didn't build it by persuading or by chasing applause. He started after losing everything. He listened more than he spoke. He watched the world fall apart and found himself in the debris. That's what gave weight to his words. His voice didn't rise. It rested. It came from a man who no longer needed validation to feel grounded. Stoic speech begins there, not with language, but with loss, not with expression, but with essence. Seneca said that words spoken from alignment strike deeper than swords, because they aren't words. They're evidence. They're not trying to win. They're not trying to save. They're simply truth taking form in a single, unmoved sentence. When a man speaks from clarity instead of chaos, he doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't repeat himself. He says one thing, one sentence, and it stays. That's what this is about. Not a tactic, not a trick, not a script to get a reaction. It's about one phrase, one truth, one verbal anchor that reflects the axis you live from, not the emotion you're drowning in, because she doesn't remember what caught her attention. She remembers what touched her balance, what disrupted her rhythm, what echoed in her when you were no longer speaking. Why does this matter? Because most men are trained to perform, to react, to prove, but that path never earns respect. It just exhausts you. It drains your center. Stoic masculinity is a return to expression without desperation, words without weightless need, dignity without display. And when you speak from that place, once, she'll never forget it, because it wasn't said to impress her. It was said because it was the truth. And truth, spoken from stillness, never fades. We begin there. There's a moment in every man's life when he realizes she wasn't drawn to your achievements. She didn't stay for your appearance. And she won't remember what made you clever. She remembers one thing, how safe she felt in your presence, or how mysterious it was to stand near you. Most men forget that. They decorate their words. They sharpen their wit. They try to mirror her mind, thinking connection is found through compatibility. But she doesn't need another reflection. She needs a center. Your axis is the part of you that doesn't move just because someone else does. It's the inner current you don't need to announce, but that she feels when you speak. Most men chase approval in subtle ways. The need to be liked, understood, accepted. But that need bleeds into your voice. And when your words are dressed in performance, they evaporate. She might nod. She might smile. But something in her won't feel it, because it didn't come from stillness. It came from search. You can spend years trying to impress a woman who would have respected you more if you'd just stayed still. You can say 100 clever lines that vanish within the hour, or you can speak once, from the place inside you that needs nothing. The axis doesn't speak to be noticed. It speaks because it cannot be ignored. It's not about being emotionless. It's about being emotionally anchored. And when you speak from that place, even silence has depth. Neuroscience confirms what Stoicism has long taught. The tone of calm presence activates parts of the brain tied to emotional memory, not logic. She doesn't store what made sense. She stores what felt grounded, what felt contained. That's why the man who says little, but lives in alignment, leaves a longer mark than the man who says everything but lives in chaos. So when you try to impress her with surface, what you're really doing is hiding your axis. And that's the invisible mistake, because she's not looking for your noise. She's looking for your weight. Speak from the place that doesn't move when you're alone. That's what she won't forget. It's not always the words that fail. Sometimes it's the place inside you they came from. You can speak with the right vocabulary and still leave no trace, because what she remembers isn't what you said. It's how your presence shaped the space between you. Most men think content matters most, but presence always comes first. And presence isn't about volume. It's about vibration. It's about what your tone reveals, about you. When your voice carries guilt, she hears it. When it carries resentment, she feels it. When it carries need, it drains her. But when it carries stillness, when it carries calm that wasn't forced but forged, she listens. Not because you made her, but because she couldn't help it. Tonality driven by unresolved emotion creates friction. Even if the words sound right, something in her resists. But when the voice is clean, not perfect, just congruent, it becomes a mirror, not a weapon. The most powerful words aren't decorated, they're grounded. A quiet, "I understand," can change more than an hour of arguments. Not because of the phrase, but because of where it came from. A man who says that from emotional stillness doesn't need a reaction. He isn't bargaining. He isn't pleading. He's just present. And presence, true presence, doesn't need to defend itself. It resonates. There was once a father who barely spoke. His children grew up not with his words, but with the memory of his tone, the way he said their name when they were afraid, the way he said enough when it mattered. He didn't teach them with speeches. He taught them with stillness, with consistency, with the weight behind his silence. And years later, they didn't quote him. They remembered him, because tone becomes legacy, and presence becomes memory. She forgets what you say when it comes from effort. She remembers how you said it when it came from depth. So speak less from the need to explain, and more from the place that needs nothing. Speak from the man you've become in the quiet. That's what stays. Silence isn't neutral. It always says something. The question is, from where does it speak? Most men believe that staying quiet is always a show of strength, but silence has layers. Silence can protect, or it can avoid. It can reflect order, or it can reveal fear. And she feels the difference. She won't say it, but she'll adjust to it. If your silence is born from clarity, she'll find herself grounding in it. If it's born from confusion or avoidance, she'll start withdrawing, quietly, consistently. There's a kind of silence that teaches her you don't run from storms. You absorb them, that you don't react because you're listening deeper than most. But there's another silence, the kind that teaches her you've given up without saying so, that you've buried your truth too deep to access. And that version doesn't protect you. It erodes you. It makes her do the emotional work for both of you. And one day, she stops. Zeno taught through paradox. He said less to mean more, but he never used silence as an escape. He used it as a vessel, for observation, for principle, for weight. When your silence is chosen, not defaulted, it becomes sacred. But if your silence is a shield for emotional neglect, it slowly teaches her that your presence is a performance, that behind your eyes, nothing is reaching for her, just distance. Women don't memorize details. They memorize emotional imprints. They don't file away sentences. They carry atmospheres. A man who speaks once with soul does more than the man who narrates his fears every night. Because she doesn't want your constant voice. She wants your anchored voice, the one that comes without agenda, the one that says, "I'm here," without needing to prove it. But that silence comes at a cost if it isn't conscious. If you're quiet because you don't know how to be real, she'll feel it. If you're quiet because you don't trust your truth, she'll sense it. And if you're quiet because you're hoping she'll guess what you need, you're not building presence. You're teaching absence. Speak less, yes, but only when that silence is filled with meaning, not absence. Speak once, but let it echo. Let the echo do the rest. There's a moment when a man starts saying too much, not because he's expressive, but because he's afraid of being misunderstood, afraid of being misread, afraid of being seen as cold, distant, or unfeeling. So he over-explains. He fills the silence. He clarifies every emotion, every decision, every pause. But what he doesn't see is that every extra word chips away at his weight. Every attempt to explain becomes a quiet confession. I'm not sure of my own presence. Over-explaining is fear in disguise. It looks like clarity, but it's desperation with a mask on. It's a hidden plea that says, "Please get me. Please don't misjudge me. Please don't leave." But a man who trusts his center doesn't plead for understanding. He offers truth, calmly. He speaks once. He stands by it. He doesn't chase comprehension, because he knows his alignment is enough. She might not say it, but she feels it. Every extra explanation tells her something you didn't mean to say, that you need her permission to feel what you feel, that you need her agreement to hold your line. And the more you explain, the less she listens. Not because she's cruel, but because the weight of your words begins to shrink. They lose form. They become fog. Instead, speak like your words have mass, like they were carried from a long distance. Use fewer. Let them land. Let them rest. A man who speaks with emotional authority doesn't say more to be understood. He says less to be remembered. His voice doesn't just say something. It holds something. And that's what she'll feel. That's what won't leave her. Speak like a man who can walk away, not in threat, not in arrogance, but in alignment. Speak like you've made peace with being misread, because you weren't performing for clarity, you were living it. Over-explaining robs your presence of its gravity. It makes your truth sound negotiable, so speak once, then let the silence protect your sentence. That's where presence is built. Not in the noise, but in the space that follows your voice. Most men speak their boundaries too late, after they've been crossed, after their trust has eroded, after their patience has turned to resentment, and when they finally speak, it comes out as blame, as anger, as accusation. But a true boundary isn't reactive. It isn't a wall thrown up in desperation. It's a quiet standard, spoken before the storm, not after. And the man who learns to speak from that place doesn't need to yell. He doesn't need to defend. He just says the line and lets it stand. The shift is simple, but profound. It moves from, "You make me feel," to, "I've learned I no longer allow this in my space." One sentence. Not loaded, not defensive, just anchored, just clear. It doesn't attack her, it doesn't shame her, it doesn't try to control her behavior. It simply reflects your own threshold. And that's where true power lives, not in domination, but in sovereignty. Because when you say, "You make me feel," you hand her your authority. You place your emotional state in her hands and ask her to manage it. But when you say, "I've learned what I no longer allow," you reclaim your space. You take ownership without drama. You reveal your growth without needing to prove it. And a woman, whether she agrees or not, feels the shift. She may challenge it. She may resist it, but she will respect it, if it's consistent. Neuroscience backs this, even if stoicism never named it. The moment a person self-differentiates, emotionally separates their truth from someone else's behavior, it creates safety in the nervous system. It signals maturity. It lowers conflict, because now there's no enemy, just clarity, just space. And space, when it's respected, builds intimacy. She remembers the man who calmly detached, not because he stopped caring, but because he started caring about himself in a new way. He didn't need to be cruel. He didn't need to be right. He just needed to stop abandoning his own standard in the name of keeping peace. And that sentence, spoken once, without force, is the one she never forgets, because it wasn't a reaction, it was a revelation. A man who speaks from sovereignty doesn't just set boundaries, he becomes one. There's a quiet desperation in needing someone to understand you, not because understanding is wrong, but because the hunger behind it often signals something deeper, a loss of self. When a man begins to beg for clarity, for emotional reassurance, for validation through explanation, he's already given away the very ground he's standing on. He's not seeking connection anymore. He's asking for permission to exist, and that's not love. That's erasure. Masculine speech at its core doesn't ask to be held. It stands on its own, not coldly, not with pride, but with presence. When you feel the urge to chase understanding, pause. Ask yourself, do I need her to see me, or have I stopped seeing myself? There's a difference, and that difference shapes everything. A man who knows who he is does not require constant confirmation. He doesn't demand closure like a wounded child. He closes what he needs to, in silence if he must, and walks. The moment you ask for her to explain what she feels, what she meant, why she withdrew, if your voice is coming from emotional scarcity, she feels it. She may respond, she may not, but something in her instinctively leans away, not because you don't deserve answers, but because the energy behind your question isn't grounded. It's grasping, and grasping kills respect. It replaces presence with pressure. It turns your desire for clarity into a performance of dependency. Chrysippus once wrote that a wise man speaks as the world moves, not as it demands. That means your speech should come from your axis, not your agony. From your center, not your chaos. From your alignment, not your appetite for explanation. Because when you need her to make sense of your emotions for you, you're asking her to carry what you haven't yet faced, and that is not her role. This doesn't mean silence every emotion. It means anchor them before you speak. It means pause before you pursue. Because when you don't, you confuse emotional intimacy with emotional rescue. And she can't rescue you. She can only respond to the man who rescues himself. So if you're begging for answers, step back. Ask yourself, is it her clarity I need, or my own? Because when you reclaim your own ground, you stop asking her to explain what you were meant to embody. And that shift changes everything. It turns you from a seeker of validation into a keeper of presence. And that man is unforgettable. There comes a moment when words stop being tools and start becoming reflections, when you're no longer trying to communicate something new but to reveal something eternal. And in that moment, the most powerful thing you can say is not clever or poetic or rehearsed. It's something simple, aligned, clean, a sentence that doesn't push, doesn't pull, just stands like a mirror. Not for her approval, but for your own integrity. A phrase like, "I would have stood with you, but I won't kneel for us." It doesn't threaten. It doesn't beg. It doesn't explain. It just declares. It draws a line, not between you and her, but between who you've been and who you refuse to stop being. That's why she remembers it. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was undeniable. It wasn't a message crafted to win her. It was a reflection of the man you became while she wasn't watching. Men often chase the perfect thing to say, the words that will stick, the line that will echo, but memory doesn't work like that. A woman remembers what anchored her, what stilled her, what mirrored something sacred, either in you or in the truth you chose. The sentence that stays isn't brilliant. It's aligned. It doesn't sound good. It feels true, and that feeling cannot be replaced, because it wasn't planted, it was revealed. And here's the quiet truth. When you speak from that place, it doesn't matter if she responds. It doesn't matter if she agrees, or softens, or stays, because you didn't speak for the outcome. You spoke to mark a moment, to honor what mattered, to close a chapter without slamming the door. Words like that aren't meant to control, they're meant to liberate. For both of you, she might forget everything else, the long talks, the soft apologies, even the anger. But that one sentence, rooted in your spine, not your wounds, will stay. Not as a memory of pain or guilt or regret, but as the last time you stood, fully present, with no need to raise your voice. The sentence that didn't try to prove anything, just reflected your standard. And that, above all, is unforgettable. A man who speaks from peace does not need to persuade. He does not raise his voice to be heard. He does not repeat himself to feel seen, because when you speak from stillness, from alignment, from that deep place inside you that no one gave you, but that life carved into you, you only need to say it once. Zeno of Citium rebuilt his philosophy from loss, not logic, from silence, not performance. He didn't preach, he observed. He walked among men, not above them. His teachings survived not because they were loud, but because they were lived. Stoic speech was never about control. It was about calibration, clarity. A man who speaks only when he means it becomes unforgettable, not because he talks often, but because he doesn't waste breath. Epictetus once wrote, "First say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do." You don't speak to declare who you are. You speak to confirm who you've already become. And if you haven't lived it, don't say it. If it's still fear in your voice, don't dress it as wisdom. Let silence refine you before sound reveals you. A tree never announces its growth. It doesn't decorate its roots. It doesn't perform. But the weight of it, the presence of it, is undeniable. That's how you speak. Not to rise above her, not to win her back, but to anchor yourself. And when that sentence finally comes, when it rises from your bones and not your performance, it will echo longer than you can imagine. So let your voice be rare. Let your presence speak before your mouth does. And when the moment comes to say it, just say it. Calm, clear, still, and walk. Because if it's truly you, you only have to say it once.